What you're looking at is the rear view of the original factory that was originally built. The plant was originally built in 1929 as Sikorsky Aero Engineering Corporations and Manufacturing Facilities. What most people don't know is we know Sikorsky for helicopter production, but actually they started out building seaplanes. In the 1930s, due to the Depression and other things, seaplanes were no longer in vogue as land-based planes became more reliable. Sikorsky then merged with Chance Voigt in 1938, and the Voigt-Sikorsky company then built the Voigt-Sikorsky OS-2u Kingfisher, which was also a seaplane, and then they went on to build the Voigt-Sikorsky F4u Corsair, along with other lesser-known models. Voigt production was moved to a government facility in Dallas, Texas in 1949 due to extreme labor shortages and production costs in Connecticut. In 1954, Sikorsky relocated their manufacturing to a new plant further up the Housatonic River because of chronic flooding. In 1951, the U.S. Air Force purchased the facility and placed Avco as the contractor, and they would produce engines in the plant until 1998, when they relocated to Phoenix, Arizona. What you see currently is the abandoned buildings that are located in and around the old plant. It covers roughly 74 acres. Many of the buildings are deteriorated, and you'll see in some of the other pictures how bad it actually is. The sign here could not better encapsulate the contributions of Chance Voigt to the war. First and foremost, the plane that they are perhaps not as well known for, but the plane that saved more lives than probably any other during the war was the Voigt-Sikorsky plane, the Kingfisher. The Kingfisher was the backbone of the Navy, Army, and whatever. When they needed to ship stuff rapidly from one point to another, they would use the Kingfisher. The Catalinas, the bigger and the larger PBYs, had very limited use simply because of their size and their weight. They could carry larger loads, but they couldn't always land, and they had very limited use on seas that were at best choppy. The Kingfisher was much more durable, and it also could be landed on land. And notice the wheels here. So Chance Voigt and the Kingfisher had already earned a reputation as being one of the finest planes around. The Kingfishers are still utilized today in some parts of the world, specifically in Alaska. Their basic design is still used, and it's used for aquatic landings in Alaska. What you see is the combat channel, the Corsair. And it's again, while we're here, we're located approximately within a few hundred yards of the actual plant, and this is the airport where all the planes were actually sent off of. The motto was 5 planes a day. At peak production, they attempted to produce 5 planes a day out of this location. The most famous of all the Corsair pilots was due to the television show Black Sheep Squadron, was Major Pappy Boyington. Him and his squad were portrayed as backward and rebels in a sense, but very effective because of the strength of their planes. It made the Corsair sexy, it made the Corsair famous. While there were other planes in the war that were utilized more, and certainly the Navy used like the Hellcat. So when we see the Corsairs landing on and off the carrier planes of carriers, that's not exactly accurate. They may have been shipped on the carriers, but for the most part, they were land-based. The most infamous instance. The remainder of my presentation will take place in the Connecticut Air and Space Museum, located in Stratford, Connecticut. You'll see a link for it if you wish to look and get further information on the site. This is for the prominent displays that are there. There are also several different displays that are currently in production or are being put together. It says a humble air museum located in an original World War II aircraft factory. There is some truth to that. It is built in the old Curtiss hangar, which invariably had done work on World War II aircraft, but it was more done as a storage location for the planes that were being shipped out.
The actual factory is across the street, which you saw in one of the previous slides.
I'm standing in front of the historic Curtis Hangar. The Curtis Hangar became the Chance Vought Company after 1929. Here's where they built the Corsair. We're about to enter the Connecticut Air and Space Museum. It's been adapted from the Curtis Hangar, which is currently being restored and put back into context. If you can see, right now there's actually no roof on the building. Pan up a little bit. Show up there. You see the original structure as it stood in 1929, prior to being used by Chance Vought. Yep. Behind me, you see the F4u Corsair that was built by Chance Vought. It really started production in 1940. If you'll notice, there's a unique structure to the plane, unique gull wings on the side. This plane was thought of as sexy because of the curves that it had on the wings. There were many pilots that would always refer to it like she, and they would always love the curves on the plane. The plane somewhat imitates the 1933 Stuka dive bomber that was built by the Germans. But unlike the German Stuka, this plane was a full-fledged fighter plane. The Stuka was merely a dive bomber and had serious problems when it was pursued by any Allied fighter plane. This plane could stand toe-to-toe with any plane in production, up to the German Messerschmitt 262, the jet, and it would stand its own and could easily outfly and outfight any one of those planes. But what it had was serious problems. This plane was originally designed to be used as a carrier-based fighter. But because of the structures on the plane and because of serious flaws in the initial planes, it was rejected by the Navy and became the Marine fighter. Because the plane was sent over to the British, some of the British pilots had been trained at Pensacola in 1940 and had been waiting a year and a half to get a fighter plane. The British were desperate and had no choice. They had to accept whatever they could get from the Americans or from any other sources. They used the Corsair, but it was to their detriment, as many of their pilots would suffer. The Corsair's main problem, and if you come around to the front here and look at the extended area between the fuselage and the propeller made it difficult to land on carriers. British pilots attempting to land on a carrier would have to come in on an angle and on the side. If you're trying to land on the flat deck, that's not always advantageous. Think about a carrier rolling, turning, and twisting on the sea up and down, and you're trying to come in from the side and you can't make a straight entrance. It proved very problematic for many of the pilots trying to land them, and the British would have higher casualty rates simply because of that. One of the main reasons that the US Navy rejected this plane for carrier use was the fact that it was very difficult for pilots to get out of. If you had to ditch at sea, it was found, especially on the initial models. This is probably one of the more advanced models that has been fixed up. But on the initial models, this cap was much smaller. The spacing to get out and to be released from the plane was very difficult. Several pilots would lose their lives while they were doing this. This was one of the main reasons that the Navy rejected the plane initially for use on carriers, because the pilots could not escape at sea, which proved to be the death of many a pilot, specifically in the British Navy. The various switches, dials, and gauges would have been utilized very sparingly by the majority of the pilots that flew these planes. One of the British pilots who had to turn his lights on while trying to do a dusk carrier landing had no idea which lights to turn on. When he asked his flight commander, "What switch do I hit?" the commander replied, "I have no bloody idea, just hit them all, that's what I did." Again, the plane was more advanced than the majority of planes that were flown at the time. It was ahead of its time, and it would be used up until 1979 in foreign aviation. The first problem that was noticed by pilots, especially pilots who were training and trying to navigate, was the fact that the plane has no floor. If you're attempting to use a map or any other device inside the plane and you drop it, you're not able to pick it up. This would prove fatal on a number of missions where pilots would be unable to navigate, and especially for Flight 422, when their commander was unable to find the maps that he needed to navigate. Now granted, that flight flew into a typhoon and that was a major source, but they were unable to gather the maps and or the radio codes that they needed to contact to get help, simply because they couldn't get anything they had dropped on the floor. The most infamous of all was Squadron 422. Everyone who studies American history should hear about Squadron 422. Squadron 422 was 24 planes that were stationed to go into service of Marine fighter pilots. Of the 24 planes, only 23 left that day because one wouldn't start because of a mechanical failure. Of the 23 planes, only one of them ever made it to its location. 16 of the pilots actually survived the incidents. They were sent into a typhoon due to General Louis Merritt. Again, General Louis Merritt's name should be known alongside Benedict Arnold and many other infamous U.S. generals. General Louis Merritt sent the entire squad headlong into a typhoon because of a contest of egos with another officer, and he refused to send a guide plane with the squadron, which was its downfall. Now granted, there are other issues that led to the demise of this. The commander of the squad, it would appear, seemed to have lost his nerve or had realized how desperate the circumstances were and simply flew off in his own direction. He would later be honored by the members of his squad, I would say erroneously so. In a book that was written by one of the sons of one of the pilots, the squadron is given more credit than probably it's due. The gentleman certainly went through an ordeal, but it cannot be considered a historical document. The lost flight is more of a homage to the squadron. If any historian is looking for a subject matter that they wish to explore further, Squadron 422 should be known by everyone and everybody who studies U.S. history. It is probably one of the biggest disasters that ever happened in American aviation. The problem why we don't know about it is because shortly after this occurred and before news hit the press was Victory in Europe Day, and it sucked up all the ink and all the press for the next 2 weeks.
Remember the song?
Can you sing a little bit of it?
Yes. I can give it all to you if you want.
All right, please.
Let's keep the Corsairs flying high for all our fighting men across the sea. Let's keep those Corsairs flying high, and from there we'll go on to victory. For every Corsair in the sky, a dozen enemy planes will die. So let's all stick together like birds of a feather. Keep the Corsairs flying high. Let's keep those Corsairs flying high.
Can you show me exactly where on this model you worked?
We were right underneath the wing section. Can you see that?
Yep, right under the
Right
wings.
underneath the wing section where all the hydraulic lines were. And that's where we had to work every day.
So the wings were on the plane when you were working on it?
Oh, yeah, it was the wing section, right.
Okay.
The wings, the plane wasn't there, just the wings were there.
Oh, so you weren't actually the plane wasn't assembled yet.
No,
There was no fuselage.
it was just a wing
Just the wing.
section,
Okay.
right?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.